The harassment began just hours after Magnus Carlsen's explosive revelation about Education Minister Lars Henriksen hit Norwegian media. By Wednesday morning, Oslo municipal inspectors were swarming his Chess Foundation offices, claiming anonymous complaints about permit violations and safety concerns. But Magnus knew this coordinated attack was revenge for exposing government corruption. What he didn't expect was discovering that the man orchestrating this municipal conspiracy, Social Services Director Joakim Berg, had been stealing money meant to protect Norway's most vulnerable children. You see, what Magnus was about to uncover would prove that the corruption in Norwegian politics ran deeper than gaming company investments and educational manipulation. When politicians control the systems designed to protect children, they can commit crimes that would shock even the most cynical observers. And the evidence Magnus found would lead him to discover disturbing connections to the Nordic Ministerial alliance that reached across multiple countries. Magnus stood in his foundation's main office, watching municipal officials tear through filing cabinets and educational materials under the pretense of a routine inspection. The timing was obviously coordinated. Less than 24 hours after his evidence against Henriksen went public, suddenly his legally operating chess foundation required emergency review. "Mr. Carlsen," announced the lead inspector, a stern woman with the bureaucratic authority that came from years of intimidating citizens, "we've received multiple complaints about your organization's compliance with youth safety regulations." Magnus studied the inspection warrant, immediately recognizing the administrative language designed to sound legitimate while providing maximum harassment potential. The complaints were anonymous, the violations were vague, and the inspection scope was deliberately broad enough to disrupt operations indefinitely. "What specific violations are you investigating?" Magnus asked, knowing that demanding specificity often revealed the weakness of bureaucratic harassment campaigns. "Improper supervision ratios, inadequate safety protocols, and potential misuse of educational funds," the inspector replied, reading from a script that had clearly been prepared in advance. But Magnus noticed something that revealed the true nature of this attack. The inspector's paperwork contained administrative codes that didn't match standard municipal procedures. Someone had rushed this harassment campaign so quickly that they hadn't properly coordinated the documentation, leaving evidence of the political motivation behind the inspection. As the harassment continued throughout the day, Magnus began his own investigation into who was orchestrating the municipal response to his exposure of Henriksen. The paper trail led directly to Joakim Berg, Oslo's Social Services Director, who had unusual authority over youth-related inspections and permits. Berg's public profile painted him as a dedicated child advocate who had spent his career protecting vulnerable Norwegian families. But Magnus's research revealed troubling patterns in Berg's administrative decisions and financial arrangements that suggested a very different reality. The first red flag came from analyzing Berg's budget allocations over the past 3 years. Children's welfare programs under his oversight had experienced consistent funding cuts, while administrative costs and consulting fees had increased dramatically. Money meant to help struggling families was being redirected into vague categories that were difficult to track or verify. Magnus discovered that Berg had approved over 15 million kroner in payments to consulting companies, with minimal documentation of services provided. These weren't legitimate social service providers, they were shell companies registered to addresses that didn't exist or belonged to Berg's personal associates. But the most damning evidence came from cross-referencing Berg's consultant payments with the needs of actual Norwegian families seeking assistance. While Berg was channeling millions to his fake consulting companies, waiting lists for child welfare services had grown longer, and emergency assistance had become increasingly difficult to obtain. "Children are our highest priority," Berg had declared during a recent municipal budget meeting. But his private actions revealed that enriching himself and his associates took precedence over protecting the vulnerable children his department was supposed to serve. Magnus felt his anger building as he realized the scope of Berg's betrayal. Parents struggling to protect their children were being denied assistance so that a corrupt bureaucrat could steal public money for personal benefit. This wasn't just financial corruption. It was theft from the most vulnerable members of Norwegian society. The investigation revealed Berg's sophisticated system for covering his tracks. Fake consulting reports were created to justify payments. Shell companies were rotated regularly to avoid detection. Even the municipal budget documents were manipulated to make the consulting expenses appear legitimate. But Berg had made one crucial mistake. His coordination of the harassment campaign against Magnus had required him to communicate with other municipal officials through channels that left electronic records. Magnus discovered emails between Berg and various department heads, discussing pressure strategies and permit complications for organizations that created political difficulties. The communications revealed that Berg wasn't acting alone. The Oslo municipal conspiracy involved multiple department heads who coordinated harassment campaigns against anyone who threatened their corruption network. Magnus's chess foundation was just their latest target. The Carlsen situation needs immediate attention, Berg had written to the municipal legal department. Use every available regulatory tool to create compliance burdens that will force him to focus on administrative issues rather than political investigations. Magnus found evidence that this strategy had been used before against journalists, activists, and business owners who had exposed municipal corruption. Bergen would identify threats to the political network, then coordinate multi-department harassment campaigns designed to exhaust targets' time, money, and energy. But the most shocking discovery came from Berg's private correspondence with contacts outside Norway. References to coordination with Nordic Ministerial alliance, partners, and discussions about expanding municipal protection protocols to other jurisdictions. The corruption wasn't limited to Oslo or even Norway. Berg was apparently part of an international network of politicians who shared strategies for suppressing political opposition and protecting corrupt practices across multiple Nordic countries. The Bergen model has proven very effective, one partially decoded message revealed. Municipal harassment combined with media pressure creates sustainable protection for ministerial-level operations. Magnus realized he had stumbled onto evidence of systematic political corruption that extended across national boundaries. The Oslo municipal conspiracy was connected to similar networks in other Nordic countries, all working together to protect politicians who were stealing public money and abusing their authority. As Magnus compiled his evidence against Berg, he discovered the human cost of the social services director's crimes, case files showing children who had been denied critical assistance while Berg channeled money to his shell companies, families who had been forced into homelessness or dangerous situations because Bergen prioritized personal enrichment over public service. One particularly heartbreaking case involved a single mother whose application for emergency housing assistance had been denied repeatedly, while Berg approved payments to consulting companies that existed only on paper. Her child had ended up in the hospital due to exposure-related illness caused by inadequate housing. Magnus understood that exposing Berg's theft wasn't just about corruption. It was about protecting Norwegian children from a system that was supposed to help them but had instead been turned into a personal enrichment scheme for selfish politicians. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Berg had stolen millions of kroner from children's welfare programs. He had coordinated harassment campaigns against political opponents. Most seriously, he had participated in an international conspiracy to protect corrupt politicians across multiple countries. But Magnus also knew that exposing Berg would trigger an even more aggressive response from the Nordic Ministerial alliance. These weren't just local politicians protecting their personal interests. They were part of an international network with resources and coordination capabilities that extended across national governments. As Magnus prepared to release his evidence against Berg, he received intelligence about the Nordic Ministerial alliance that made him understand the true scope of what he was fighting. The alliance included politicians from Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland, who coordinated policies, shared corruption strategies, and protected each other from political exposure. The theft of children's welfare funds in Oslo was being replicated in cities across the Nordic region. The harassment techniques used against Magnus were standard protocols shared between municipal networks in multiple countries. Even the shell company structures were coordinated internationally to make detection and prosecution more difficult. Magnus realized that his fight against Norwegian political corruption was actually part of a much larger battle against systematic abuse of power throughout Nordic society. But he also understood that his platform as a world-famous chess champion gave him unique opportunities to expose this network in ways that ordinary citizens couldn't achieve. The war against Norwegian political corruption was escalating, but Magnus Carlsen was ready for the fight. He had spent his career analyzing complex strategic situations and finding ways to turn apparent weaknesses into winning positions. Now he would apply those same skills to protecting Norwegian children from politicians who had betrayed their most basic responsibilities. The evidence against Joakim Berg was ready for release, and the Nordic Ministerial alliance was about to face exposure by someone they hadn't expected to challenge their international conspiracy. Magnus had always believed that strategic thinking and patient analysis could overcome any opponent. Now, he was about to prove that a world champion chess player could defeat corrupt politicians who thought their power made them untouchable.